Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're diving into something that really touches all of us, something that can feel like a bit of a storm, dealing with criticism.
Yeah, it's unavoidable, isn't it?
Totally. I mean, think about it. Anytime you step out, try something new, chase a goal, where you're going to run into it.
Mm-hmm.
And our source for this deep dive, it really highlights this tension, needing that tender heart to connect, but also needing to grow a tough hide to handle the hits.
Right. And the source points out, pretty honestly, that tough hide, that's often the harder one to develop.
It really is.
It's such a universal challenge. And the audio source material we're exploring today goes deep, drawing on ancient wisdom and particularly looking at the life of a historical figure who faced just relentless, often really unfair opposition.
Exactly. So our mission here for this deep dive is basically to unpack this source, pull out the key insights, understand why opposition and criticism seem to be, well, unavoidable when you're doing anything that matters.
And get practical.
Right. And most importantly, pull out strategies you can actually use the next time you're, facing down your own critics.
Yeah.
So let's get into it.
Okay. So the source starts off making this really powerful case. Opposition isn't just like a possible side effect of striving for something. It's fundamentally linked to the striving itself. It quotes William Arthur Ward saying, "For every achievement, there is a price. For every goal, there is an opponent. For every victory, there is a problem. And for every triumph, there is sacrifice."
Wow. That really frames it, doesn't it? Opposition isn't the exception. It's almost part of the deal if you're aiming for something significant.
Exactly. It's tied to purpose, tied to action.
And that connection, striving, and opposition, it's key. The source also points out, though, that there isn't just one single way people have dealt with this historically.
Right. You've got different approaches.
Like you have figures like Abraham Lincoln, who apparently felt, if he stopped to answer every single attack, he'd never get anything done.
So he just focused on the work.
Yeah, basically ignored it, channeled his energy elsewhere.
But then you have this almost opposite view, someone like Charles Hayden Spurgeon, who maybe a bit controversially suggested you might even welcome criticism.
Welcome it, really?
Yeah, especially, he thought, from enemies, because their malice might actually expose faults that your friends are maybe too kind to point out.
Two very different mindsets there.
Definitely. And the source acknowledges that, yeah, sometimes criticism does come from places that are just, well, malicious. Pure ill will.
Not constructive at all.
No. It uses an illustration from the source material just to make the point that some opposition really does stem from genuine antagonism. The idea being, not every critic is trying to help you improve. Some just want to tear you down.
Right. That's an important distinction.
And the source really stresses that if you're in any kind of visible role or pursuing what it calls a significant calling ministry, is the example used, you're often going to face, well, a lot more criticism and more intense criticism.
It sort of comes with the territory.
Seems that way, according to the source. Which brings us to this really striking verse the source highlights. It's the Apostle Paul writing in 1 Corinthians 16:9. He says, "A wide door for effective service has opened to me, and there are many adversaries."
Many adversaries. That phrase really stands out.
It's potent, isn't it? The source notes one rendering, Eugene Peterson's in the Message, calls it mushrooming opposition.
Mushrooming.
Yeah, it paints this picture that as your opportunities grow, the opposition doesn't just show up, it multiplies. It grows right along with the opportunity.
Almost like a shadow.
Kind of.
Yeah.
And the source drives this point home with a really blunt, almost startling saying it mentions. Our Lord was nailed to a cross, so you can count on being nailed to the wall.
Oof. That's intense.
It is. It's a challenging truth, right? Doing meaningful work, especially the kind of spiritual work the source focuses on, it doesn't buy you a pass from difficulty. It often guarantees you'll face intense criticism.
Nailed to the wall. Not exactly comforting, but it makes the point crystal clear. Okay, so if opposition is inherent and it mushrooms, how do we even start to understand what it looks like, how it behaves?
Well, our source turns to a writer named David Roer and what he calls the 4 laws of criticism. These are from his book, A Burden Shared. They're basically observations about how criticism typically shows up in life.
Okay, like patterns. That sounds helpful. What's the first one?
The first law is criticism always comes when we least need it.
Oh, tell me about it.
Right. When you're already feeling down, maybe vulnerable, struggling with something else, bam, that's when the critical hit often lands. It's like it has radar.
It really feels that way sometimes. Okay, law number 2.
Number 2, It seems to come when we least deserve it. Now, this isn't about objective deserving, of course, but it often feels that way.
Like after an honest mistake, maybe?
Exactly. Or you make some innocent, off-the-cuff comment, gets totally misinterpreted, and suddenly you're facing this huge backlash that feels completely out of proportion.
Been there. Okay, what's the third law?
This third one is, I think, really insightful. Criticism often comes from people who are least qualified to give it.
Oh,
And the source makes a really important distinction here. It contrasts this kind of unqualified criticism with what it calls faithful wounds.
faithful wounds.
Yeah, criticism from someone who genuinely knows you, loves you, has your best interests at heart, speaks truth in love. It references Proverbs 27:6, even mentions the Hebrew phrasing about bruises caused by the wounding of one who loves you. That kind of input, even though it stings, can be valuable. It comes from relationship, from context.
Because they actually know you. They see the bigger picture.
Exactly. The people who truly know your heart, your intentions, they're usually the last ones to just throw stones, But the criticism that often hurts the most and does the most damage, the source argues it frequently comes second, third, even fourth hand.
People repeating stuff they heard.
Yeah, people who don't really know you or the situation, acting on hearsay, rumors, assumptions. They haven't earned the right to speak into your life that way.
That makes so much sense. Okay, the fourth law.
Number 4, criticism frequently comes in a form that is least helpful to us.
How so?
Well, it's often vague, right? Or just purely negative, no suggestions for improvement. Or it's delivered publicly, meant to shame rather than help, just unconstructive.
Okay, so let's recap Roper's 4 laws.
Yeah.
Hits when you're down, feels undeserved, often from unqualified sources, and usually comes in an unhelpful package.
Pretty much sums up a lot of criticism, doesn't it?
It really does. And that third law about unqualified sources, it really highlights this major problem the source zeroes in on, the damage done by secondhand criticism.
Oh, absolutely. The source gives a strong warning against what it calls shadowboxing.
Shadowboxing.
Yeah, engaging with, or worse, spreading criticism that you didn't hear firsthand, or criticism that isn't being directed to the person involved. It's just corrosive. It stops any real resolution.
So the advice is?
Try to get back to the original source if you can. Or at the very least, be incredibly careful about passing along criticism from people who aren't really in a position to know. Don't fuel the fire.
Okay, that's a really practical takeaway. So if criticism often hits when we're down, comes from people who don't really get it and isn't helpful anyway, how do you actually deal with that when it happens to you? Understanding the patterns is one thing, but applying it.
Right. How do you stand firm in the middle of that storm?
Exactly. And our source finds this incredibly powerful, real-world example in the life of the Apostle Paul, specifically in the book of Acts, chapters 21 through 25. And it notes, interestingly, that the criticism seemed to get worse for him later in his ministry.
Yeah, despite this long track record of faithful service, planting churches, enduring hardship, it actually intensified. It's a fascinating paradox.
So what happened?
Well, Paul returns to Jerusalem after his third big missionary journey. You'd think maybe a hero's welcome.
You would hope so.
But no. The source describes him facing immediate false accusations, stirred up by this group called Jews from Asia, right there in the temple courts.
And these weren't small complaints, were they?
Not at all. Serious stuff. They claimed he was teaching against their people, against Jewish law, against the temple itself. And then this other charge, based purely on supposing they'd seen his non-Jewish friend Trophimus with him somewhere else in the city, they falsely accused Paul of bringing Greeks into the forbidden inner courts of the temple.
Which was a huge offense.
Massive. And these false charges, they ignited a riot. Paul gets arrested.
Wow, just like that.
And it gets worse. He's physically attacked. Later, he gets struck right in the face while speaking before the Jewish High Council, the Sanhedrin.
It's complete disrespect.
Total disrespect. And then the opposition escalates dramatically. More than 40 men form this conspiracy, taking a solemn oath not to eat or drink anything until they'd killed Paul.
40 men. That's terrifying. An assassination plot.
Absolutely. It really shows the level of hatred and malice he was up against.
Unbelievable. But the source points out a critical moment here, right? In the middle of all this chaos.
Yes, a crucial turning point. While Paul's imprisoned, locked up in his cell, God gives him this very specific personal promise. It's recorded in Acts 23, verse 11. "Take courage, for as you have solemnly witnessed to my cause at Jerusalem, so you must witness at Rome also."
Witness in Rome. That must have been huge for him.
Huge. It was something he'd longed for to preach the gospel in Rome, the very heart of the Roman Empire, under Emperor Nero himself. This promise, this divine assurance, it must have cut right through the fear and the danger of the immediate situation.
It gave him a bigger picture, a future hope.
Exactly. It reaffirmed God's ultimate plan for him, a plan that went way beyond that Jerusalem prison cell.
And then there's that almost random detail about his nephew.
Oh yeah, seems random, but it's vital. Paul's unnamed nephew somehow overhears the assassination plot.
Just happened to be in the right place.
Apparently.
Yeah.
And he brazenly gets word to the Roman commander, Lysias. And Lysias, maybe realizing how serious this was, arranges for Paul to be moved immediately under extremely heavy guard. The source actually mentions 472 soldiers.
Wow, a small army.
Basically, moved safely out of Jerusalem to Caesarea to appear before the Roman governor, Felix.
So he escapes the plot, but he's still a prisoner, still facing critics.
Right. The frying pan into the fire, maybe? Now he's facing formal charges before Governor Felix.
And the source gives us some background on Felix, right? Not exactly Mr. Integrity.
No, definitely not. He was Pontius Pilate's successor. The source calls him pretty bluntly a crook, a notoriously corrupt ruler.
Oh, great.
Yeah. It even quotes the Roman historian Tacitus, who said Felix exercised the power of a king with the mind of a slave. Doesn't exactly inspire confidence in getting a fair trial.
Not at all. And his accusers brought in backup.
They did. They hired a lawyer, an orator named Tertullus, and the source paints this vivid picture of him.
What was he like?
Full of flattery towards Felix, trying to butter him up, then launches into these exaggerated false charges against Paul. Paul calls him a pest, claims he stirs up riots throughout the world, falsely blames Commander Lysias for using violence.
Just throwing everything at the wall.
Totally. And the source adds this great little detail that Tertullus puffed out his cheeks like an advocate who knows his case is weak and is trying to make up for it with hot air.
Huh. You could almost picture it. Okay, so Paul's standing there. Corrupt judge, smooth-talking lawyer with a weak case, list of false accusations. How on earth does he respond?
This is where the source draws out these 7 key ways Paul handled it, based on Acts 24 and 25. And these are really powerful lessons for us.
Okay, let's break them down. What's the first one?
The first one is fundamental and maybe the hardest. He refused to be caught up in the emotion of the charges.
Kept his cool.
Totally. The source points out, Paul actually says he'll cheerfully make his defense. Cheerfully. Think about how we react when we're falsely accused. We get angry, defensive, maybe more emotional than the accuser.
Yeah, that's usually the first reaction. Fight or flight.
Right. But Paul didn't let their emotion dictate his.
Yeah.
He stayed composed. That's step 1.
Incredible composure. Okay, number 2.
Number 2, he stayed with the facts. He didn't get dragged into arguing about Tertullus's wild exaggerations.
Just stuck to what was verifiable.
Exactly. He points out simple facts. Look, I was only in Jerusalem 12 days ago. Check the records. I wasn't found rioting. I wasn't causing trouble in the temple, the synagogues, anywhere in the city. He basically says, prove it.
Nice. Stick to the evidence. Okay, third point.
Third, and this is crucial, he told the truth with a clear conscience. He was completely open about what he did believe and practice.
You didn't hide anything.
No. He says, okay, I follow the way, which you guys call a heresy. Fine. But I worship the same God our fathers did. I believe the law and the prophets, just like you say you do. I share the same hope in a resurrection.
So he found common ground where he could.
Yes, but he didn't compromise his core beliefs. And he strongly states his goal. I always strive to have a conscience void of offense toward God and toward men.
A clear conscience.
And the source makes such a strong point here. Truth is your greatest ally in any defense, any situation. If you introduce any falsehood, even a small one, it undermines your whole position. Doesn't matter if it's in court, at work, in your family. Truth strengthens, falsehood weakens. Always.
That's powerful. Truth and a clear conscience. Got it. Fourth point.
Fourth, he identified the original source of the criticism. Remember those Jews from Asia?
The ones who started the riot.
Yeah. Paul points back to them and says, essentially, they are the ones who should be here making these accusations face to face, if they have any.
Bringing it back to the source again. No shadow boxing.
Exactly. He's saying, don't let these hired guns speak for the people who actually claim to have seen something. Bring the real accusers forward. It echoes that warning about the damage of secondhand stuff.
Okay, makes sense. Number 5.
Point 5, and this one is about resilience. He would not surrender and quit.
Dug his heels in.
Absolutely. The source uses these great analogies like a bulldog on your ankle or like the nation of Israel refusing to let go of what God had promised them. Paul directly challenges the people right there in the room. Let these men themselves state what misdeed they found when I stood before the council. Basically, put up or shut up.
He wasn't backing down.
Not an inch. And the source brings in some quotes here to underline this tenacity. John White saying, the spiritual battle is bigger than just your personal feelings or humiliation. Sometimes you have to stand and fight for what's right, maybe even be cruel to be kind in confronting error. Use resources like Romans 8 to remember who you are in Christ.
Stand firm.
And that George MacDonald quote, God carries us if we walk, but he won't carry us if we just sit down and refuse to move. It's about courageous forward motion, even when it's hard.
I love that. God carries us if we walk. Okay, that's powerful. Number 6.
Point 6, and honestly, this one might be the most astounding. He did not become impatient or bitter.
Okay, how long was this going on?
Get this. Paul was left in prison by Felix for 2 years.
2 years, just waiting.
Just waiting. And why? The book of Acts says Felix wished to do the Jews a favor. Politics. Corruption.
Unbelievable. Just left him there.
Yep. Then Felix leaves, Governor Festus comes in, and Festus also wants to please the local leaders, so he asks Paul if he's willing to go back to Jerusalem for trial, basically throwing him back to the wolves.
After 2 years in limbo.
Right. And Paul's response to Festus is incredibly short and to the point, just 19 words in English. I have committed no offense either against the law of the Jews or against the temple or against Caesar.
Wow. That's it.
That's it. And the source highlights what's remarkable about what he didn't say.
Like what?
No complaining about his rights as a Roman citizen, which he could have done. No reminding them of his importance as an apostle. No whining about how much good work he could be doing if he wasn't stuck in jail unjustly for 2 years.
Just the facts.
Yeah.
No bitterness.
None that we see. Just a simple, factual denial. That ability to stay free from impatience and bitterness after such prolonged, unfair treatment, it points to something really deep going on inside him.
It really does. Which leads us perfectly, I think, into number 7.
Exactly. The 7th way Paul handled criticism, which is maybe the foundation for all the others, he stood on the promise of God.
That promise about Rome.
Yes. Remember back in Acts 23 in that prison cell in Jerusalem, God promised him, you must witness at Rome also. That promise was his anchor.
Through Felix, through Festus, through the 2 years.
Through all of it. It was the bedrock that allowed him to confidently make his appeal to Caesar. He knew God's plan was bigger than these corrupt governors or false accusations. God had said Rome, so somehow he was going to get to Rome.
So even when Festus said, to Caesar you have appealed, to Caesar you will go, Paul could hear that differently.
Right. Not just as a legal ruling, but maybe as the next step in God fulfilling his promise. It ties into that idea the source mentions, how significance is often misunderstood. Paul was misunderstood, opposed, imprisoned, but he was standing on a divine promise that gave him perspective and strength.
That's an incredible framework. 7 powerful strategies.
Really practical ones, too.
So let's bring this back home.
Yeah.
For you listening right now, Paul's situation was obviously unique, incredibly high stakes, but the source makes this really compelling case that these 7 principles, they're universal. They apply when you face unfair criticism.
Whether it's big or small, at home, at work, online.
Exactly. You'll face it if you're trying to do anything worthwhile. And the source stresses that putting these into practice isn't just about willpower, it's grounded in something deeper.
Yeah, it talks about resting your case with the Lord Jesus Christ, trusting him, laying out the whole situation before him, the judge of all truth, especially when you can do it with a clear conscience, trusting him to see, to know, and to ultimately handle it.
And there's a really strong warning here from the source, too. Don't believe the lies that criticism often whispers in your ear about yourself.
Oh, that's crucial.
Right. That negative voice telling you that you are the failure, the fraud, the inadequate person the critic says you are.
Mm-hmm.
The source says that's the enemy's work. Don't internalize those lies.
Yeah, don't let the criticism define you. Which ties right back into the power of that 7th principle, doesn't it? Standing on the promise of God. That's presented as a massive source of strength.
It really is. The source mentions that old hymn, Standing on the Promises.
Classic.
And shares this really touching story about the speaker's mother who, with a neighbor, actually handwrote a promise book.
A promise book?
Yeah, like a notebook filled with specific promises from the Bible they found, sometimes even noting which promise felt right for which family member going through something tough.
Wow, that's beautiful. So personal and practical.
Isn't it? And the source really encourages you, the listener, to do something similar, to
Mhm.
actively seek out God's promises in the Bible for yourself. Claim them.
Where should someone start looking?
Well, it suggests places like the Psalms, obviously, the New Testament letters like Paul's, or the book of Proverbs. They're just packed with assurances from God.
And it gives some specific examples too, right?
Yeah, like Isaiah 41:10. Do not fear, I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. I will help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. Powerful stuff.
Definitely. And Ephesians 6.
Right, Ephesians 6:10-12. Be strong in the Lord and in the strength of his might. Put on the whole armor of God, that you may be able to stand against the schemes of the devil. Standing firm again.
So grabbing hold of those promises, that's what gives you the anchor when the storms of criticism hit.
Exactly. The source suggests that living by these promises, really claiming them, gives you strength not just to live day to day, but to be ready for whatever comes. It gives you hope. It gives you power to keep going.
Okay, so as we kind of wrap up this deep dive, we've covered a lot of ground. We looked at why criticism seems to be part of the package when you pursue something significant. We dug into David Roer's 4 laws, describing how it often shows up unhelpfully,
Right. Hits you when you're down, feels unfair.
comes from unqualified sources in unhelpful ways. But then, most importantly, we looked at Paul's example, his masterclass, really in handling intense, false accusations.
Those 7 strategies: composure, facts, truth with a clear conscience, identifying the source, refusing to quit, resisting bitterness, and standing on God's promise.
It's quite a list.
It really is. And the core message distilled from the source seems to be this: criticism will come. Expect it. But when it does, don't quit. Don't let bitterness or impatience take root.
Instead,
Stand firm in the truth. Lay your case before the Lord, especially if you have that clear conscience. Trust him with it and hold on to his promises.
yeah. And here's maybe a final thought, something the source leaves us with to mull over. What does it really mean for you personally to navigate these storms, especially knowing that doing something significant often means you will be misunderstood?
That's a big question.
It is. And maybe how can actively grabbing hold of God's promises be the actual practical strength you need to stand firm when all that doubt and fear and unfair criticism starts washing over you? What's your next step based on all this?
Powerful questions indeed. Lots to think about there. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.